Today's workshop is transition mapping. I'm excited to introduce you to Jayson Capobianco, a family resources consultant and post-secondary transition consultant for the Vermont Interdisciplinary Team, for the Vermont I-Team, which is a project at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion at the University of Vermont. He has supported individuals and teams with transitions from professional roles in developmental services and public education within Vermont. While the majority of his transition experiences revolve around post-secondary transition for young adults with disabilities, in this workshop, he will attempt to take a broader viewpoint toward all transitions. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And Jayson, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Very grateful to be here today. Thank you for everybody that's with us. Okay, does that appear as my opening slide, everybody?
Yes, looks good.
All right, thank you so much. Well, again, grateful to be here. Welcome, everybody. Today's talk is called Transition Mapping for Youth with Disabilities, Their Families and Support Teams. I am Jayson Capobianco. This is hosted by Vermont Family Network. Today is June 22nd, 2023, the day after the longest day of the year. So happy daylight, everybody. Firstly and briefly, just a special thank you to Vermont Family Network for providing this platform, connecting to do this talk, but also for lots and lots of work in lots of different areas supporting families and people in Vermont, an asset to the state. Thank you. We just touched on some of this, so I'll try to be brief, but who is Jayson? Who's this guy talking right now, and why should we listen to him? As was noted professionally, I'm a family resources consultant and a post-secondary transition consultant for the Vermont I-Team. So my job as a family resources consultant is to help families seek and access resources. And as a post-secondary transition consultant is to support teams in the process of going from high school to adulthood and exiting high school. The Vermont I-Team is a project within the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion at UVM. And previously, I had worked in special education as an employment specialist, high school employment specialist. So working job readiness, job awareness, and competitive employment. And prior to that, I worked in developmental services in a number of roles, but most notably for our purposes here as a bridge care coordinator and a funding specialist. Beyond the professional stuff, because our lives are not just what we do at work, I also provide in-home support to a family member with cognitive and physical disabilities. I am not a parent of a child with a disability, but I can relate in some forms. Beyond that, I am a human being that goes through transitions, and I would be lying if I said I dealt with them all swimmingly. Transitions can be challenging, and I get my fair share. As we'll talk about, transitions are a bit of a universal experience for people. And I encourage you to lean on your own experience. Everybody here has been through transitions in one form or another. Another thing I didn't note on here is that my mother is a developmental services career professional in Vermont. So my enculturation, early on, people with disabilities were enculturated as part of my in-group, and that's always been kind of reinforced in my upbringing since childhood. That's a little bit about who I am. And as noted, my specialty is generally my area of expertise is around that high school to adulthood transition, but today we're going to try to talk about all transitions. Let's have some fun with that. Let's explore that. Before getting into the details, I would like to touch on some values. Values are important. We're going to touch on these again in other places, but these are some values that I would like to kind of overarching values for what we're talking about today and some of where I'm coming from in the things I say. So firstly, I believe that everyone has the capacity to thrive. That means everybody has the potential to thrive. I also believe that everyone deserves the opportunity to thrive. Having the potential and the capacity isn't enough if you're not provided the opportunity. I believe that individual differences are real. And by individual differences, I mean we are all different. We are different biologically and experientially. We have different genetics, and then even identical twins who may have similar genetics, different experiences. So we all have brains that look different based on our experiences. We have personalities and traits that are different. And different is only different. Different is not good or bad. Different is different. Whether any particular trait, whether it's physical or psychological or emotional, is not good or bad on its own objectively, but rather maybe more or less adaptive in certain circumstances or contexts. So I really believe that, everybody should be empowered in their individual differences. The key is figuring out how your individual differences mesh with the world around you, so you can thrive and have that opportunity to thrive. I believe a good life can be had by anyone. I believe that good life is a very large exploration, and going back to individual differences. What is your good life? It's not just the societal checklist. If you do these things, you have a good life. We all will define our good lives slightly differently. So part of the challenge is figuring out what yours looks like and then acting on bringing it to fruition. I believe that environment is very important. Going back to deserving the opportunity to thrive, and that individual differences are real and our traits are adaptive, more or less, depending on circumstance. Well, that's going to depend a lot on environment. Does this environment mesh with who we are, therefore providing an opportunity to thrive? I believe in awareness and understanding. I believe that there's a lot of value in just having an awareness of things. When we have a general awareness, we see more of that in the world around us, and we can build out our ideas and think more creatively and build our neural networks. An example I like to use is, say you buy a new car and it's a blue car, and then you start driving it and you realize, I never noticed how many blue cars are out there. Well, there's not more blue cars than there were before you bought the car. You're just noticing them more. So you have a heightened awareness of what's out there. So again, if we can develop our awareness around transition and mapping and some of these components, we may be able to enhance our understanding simply by seeing things in the world that we didn't see before. And finally, engagement and participation. For me, the value is in the process more than the outcome. I'm not saying that outcomes are important, because they are, but life is about living. And when you're living, you're engaging and you're participating. And sometimes outcomes will be good and sometimes they will be bad. But if we take value from the process, we are always growing and learning. And also, we're not always accessible to engaging and participating. And we see that with some of the kids our own children or people we work with. If we're not accessible, if we can't engage and participate, then we're really limiting our ability to grow and develop our awareness and understanding. So I see these values as intertwined. I think they're important. Some learning objectives for the day. My hope is that we will first and foremost, develop a fundamental understanding of transition mapping. And we're going to do that by identifying meaningful features of transitions and maps and how they intersect. And then we'll review 2 examples of comprehensive mapping tools, one called Maps and one called Charting the Life course, just a concrete example. So we're not only talking conceptually about things. And going back to awareness and understanding, one reason we go in this order is because I do think it's important to understand what we're doing and how we do it before we jump right in, which is something that happens in life. Sometimes we have to jump right in. We live in a world, things can become very urgent, but the more we understand what and how, the better we will be able to do. Transitions. All right, so before I jump into the details here, I want to again remind people that as far as the scope for today, I took on a challenge of, instead of just talking about the transition kind of point in life that I'm more familiar with, of talking about all transitions, what generalizes to all transitions. And as I tried to figure that out, I learned, it quickly became evident to me, if you look at all the types of transitions across all the types of people, you have this infinitely broad scope. So what is important? How can we talk about this in a way that relates to everybody when there can be so many different types of transitions and there's so much diversity amongst people and their situations? And that led me to personally critically analyzing my own routines and thoughts and biases around this process. Sometimes the term transition mapping or transition planning, it's starting to kind of take on a jargony interpretation, meaning specifically high school to adulthood. It's often used in that way, but it can mean, and the way I'm talking about it today is in a more general sense of mapping any potential transition that may come along. So with that, we'll jump right into a little bit of what are transitions? Academia may frown on this, but what is the first thing we do when we want to define a word? Most of us, we type it into Google. So I typed transition into Google and it gave me the Oxford definition. And that definition is the process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. I sit with that definition. The word change stands out. It's about change. Something's changing when you transition. I find that meaningful because there's a lot of talk about change in the world. And there's a lot of people that have studied change in different ways. And I don't know that we've always paired these things together to realize that they could be one and the same in a sense. Thinking about change led me to think about organizational management and business. One of those areas where people have done a deep dive into change management strategies and approaches and all of that is within the business world and organizational psychology. Now, there's many different frameworks and theories, and I'm not going to say that I've read them all and I'm an expert. Somebody is, love to talk, because I think we might be able to glean some things from other fields that have played around with some of these ideas. And maybe there are things that we haven't implemented in the types of changes and the mapping that we do in a slightly different context. One explanation I saw that I liked for change management was to break it into 4 phases: conception, preparation, implementation, and resolution. That seemed to match a lot of the change or transition experiences I've had. It starts with an idea and a thinking about it phase. It moves into getting ready. What do I need? What do those things need to look like? It moves into implementing, which is doing. And then there's a resolution where you reflect what worked, what didn't, how might we do it differently? And then you'll loop back around again. I believe this 4-phase implementation came from the Wharton School at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania's business school. And then finally, I'll point out, if we're talking about all transitions, one thing that stands out to me is a distinction between small or more immediate transitions and large, what we would call micro transitions, things like getting off the bus and going into the school, transitioning from one room to another, whether it's in your home or in the school. Those smaller transitions, but can be very challenging for some. And then what I would call our macro or large scale transitions. And those would be things like going from middle school to high school and changing the entire school building, going from high school to adulthood, these things that maybe happen sometimes over the course of years and involve lots of different elements. So there's 2 kind of drastic sides to transitions depending on what we're dealing with. Features of transition. This is not meant to be exhaustive. If you have other features that you think are important, feel free to contribute. Again, I don't think we always take the time to dig in deeply to what we're doing. And I actually found that in a recent article on transition mapping and looking at all the approaches. Was one thing this article found in common between lots of different mapping approaches for people was that very few, if any, of the strategies or approaches talked at all about the conceptualization of transition mapping. What are we in fact doing and trying to do? I think it's easy to say, well, I know one word and I know the other word and I put them together. And that's kind of how I've always operated. Yeah. But if we take a deeper dive, we get to look at, what are we really dealing with? So what is transition? If transition is change, what are some of those features? Well, it can be inevitable. Change is coming. Right? There's a saying out there that change is the constant. Things are going to change. We are all going to experience transitions. And therefore, it's meaningful for us all to have an understanding and maybe some tools for dealing with them. There's a psychologist, Robert Cialdini, and I think his father was in business. And I remember hearing him say one time, his father used to have a saying, like when the business was doing well, if we want things to stay the same around here, things are going to have to change. Meaning if we want to keep up with the world, which is always changing, we need to be changing. Uncertainty, when things change, there's a little bit of uncertainty involved. We don't always know how they're going to change or how things are going to go. And when we go back to individual differences here, self-determination theory proposes uncertainty comes on a spectrum. You have people that are certainty oriented and people that are uncertainty oriented by nature. Again, not better or worse, just different in different contexts. So you can think of those people, some people that are certainty oriented, they want the plan, they don't like the plan to be changed at the last moment, they just want to know what to expect. And those uncertainty oriented people, they love to just kind of like wing it, fly by the seat of their pants, see what happens, and can almost feel boxed in by too much structure. This is important because who are we dealing with and where do they fall on this as we support people through transitions is what is their relationship with uncertainty? In personality psychology now, this also correlates with a personality trait called openness to experience. Openness to experience is one of what's called the big five in personality psychology, the 5-factor model. And same idea, you have people that are highly open to experience and people that are not very open to experience. Again, not better or worse, but just how we tend to be predisposed or how we've been trained through our experiences in our environment, but it's a personality characteristic. So who are we working with and what type of support will they need depending on who they are as a person? And then similarly, and we'll see down in the corner, community, a lot of these transitions don't happen in a vacuum. When one person's going through change, the people around them are going through change too. So then we have a dynamic around multiple people's relationships with uncertainty or openness to experience, something to be aware of. Emotion and regulation. This often comes into play with features, with transitions, with change. Again, it might depend on certainty or openness to experience. Some people may not be terribly dysregulated by change. They may welcome it and enjoy it. Other people may be reactive. It may be uncomfortable. And regulation is critical. I think the therapeutic element, think about the transitions you've been through in your life and what has given you that foundation to get through them. And part of that is your general wellness, your therapeutic support, your regulation level. When things aren't going well, when there's uncertainty, when you don't know what's going on, how do you ground yourself? I think we really want to be sensitive to people's emotion and their regulation state when they're going through these transitions. And for young people, it might be also an opportunity to help them understand and put words to those emotions and to those behaviors that are related to regulation. Because again, with transitions being everywhere and inevitable, it is arguably a life skill. You're going to be dealing with them throughout life. So you may not nail them right away, but the goal is over time just to continue to grow and get better at dealing with transitions or figuring out how you ideally interact with it, transitions or change. We've got a spectrum of control. Some transitions are completely under our control. We think about it. I want this. I want to make this change. I'm going to make this change. Let's do it. Great, it's personally driven. Sometimes change happens and transitions happen completely out of our control. We don't control what grade our student is in to an extent, when it's time to go to the next school or when they're 22 and it's time to exit high school, that's out of our control. So just recognizing this dynamic, and that's going to be featured in the mapping and the approaches, is what's under our control and what isn't. It's valuable to recognize what's not under your control, but it can also detract from the process if you spend a lot of time dwelling on that. And then, of course, individual differences. People are going to have different reactions to being controlled and not controlled. People with high anxiety and control tend to be pretty paired together. So if you have an anxious person and they're feeling controlled, you might see their anxiety go up. So again, considerations when you're going into these transitions, not just what are you doing going through a tool, but how are we supporting this individual? Time's just a natural feature of transition. Things can't really change without a little bit of time passing. But beyond that, there's a couple of, I think, interesting tidbits about time. One is there's this really entertaining TED Talk by a guy named Tim Urban. He has the blog Wait But Why, and he talks about procrastination. And spoiler alert, but toward the end, he distinguishes between deadline-based procrastination. People get really panicky because they have to get something done. And what happens when people procrastinate without deadlines? And he makes the case that we all are procrastinators without deadlines in a sense. Those things, oh, someday I'll do that. I'll get to that. I'm going to take the family overseas someday. But we never put a time limit on it. And we just keep pushing it out, keep pushing it out, keep pushing it out. And we pair that with another study, I believe this is the dark horse study from Harvard, although I may be confusing my studies, but a long longitudinal study on people. And later in life, they had people identify what were your biggest regrets. And the theme of the regrets is they were not things people had done. They were things they hadn't done. They were the chances not taken, the opportunities not acted on. So when you think about time and you think about this form of procrastination that doesn't have deadlines, when things get away, that's what people tend to regret when they look back at the end. It's not that I tried and it didn't go well. It was that I never tried. Inclusion, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. We'll get way behind. Inclusion, engagement, agency. People have to be involved with their own plan. If we make plans around people, we're missing their perspective. And we're also missing the opportunity for them to grow by being part of that process. Because again, transitions are going to be happening throughout life. So that inclusion, is about a cumulative development and growth of being able to deal with this world and the parts of it. Going back to engagement as a value. Motivation, just something that I think we really need to take into account more often, especially in education at times. We assume maybe a student is motivated, but let's think about when we're going through transitions or picking a transition or a thing, is the individual, is the team motivated to make that happen? Or are we doing it just because we think we should? Because you're going to experience different outcomes. People engage more heavily and tend to work harder when they're motivated for it. So have we assessed motivation? Have we looked at motivation? Perspective, things change. One person sees it one way, somebody else sees it a different way. Opportunity, there are positive elements to change and transition. I have said for many years, with change comes opportunity. Things are changing, and that means there's an opportunity to reorganize, carve out new niches, think of new ideas. So it can be very positive as well. It's not just a scary, uncomfortable thing. It can be a real opportunity. It can be very positive. It's a chance for growth, as we've talked about. It's an opportunity for exploration and discovery. What happens when? Oh, we learned this. Let's try that. It's a way to build your long-term experience. I would argue that resilience can come from transitions. Sometimes when they don't feel good. Overall, how do we become resilient or anti-fragile? It's by going through things that are uncomfortable and coming out the other side, ideally coming out stronger. We learn over time that we can be in situations where we are uncomfortable and then persist, then be okay afterwards. So going through these transitions and having these experiences builds resilience over time. If we don't have to go through change, then we're not developing that resilience necessarily in the same way or at the same rate. I already mentioned the communal aspect. Change for one person in social animals means a change for more than one person. Let's be honest. And finally, transitional versus transformational change or transition. I don't want to get into this too much, but just point out that some people differentiate transitional change being kind of retooling existing info into a new model. So you take it all, let's put it into a new tool or a new diagram, see what we do. Transformative change is more of a fundamental reordering of how you think, your beliefs, your culture, relationships, behavior. It falls in line almost with the term vujade, which is different than deja vu, seeing the same thing, seeing something like you feel you've experienced before. Vujade is seeing something that you've experienced before in a completely different way. Look at this individual or look at these features in this situation and see it differently than you've ever seen it before. That would be a transformative, transformative experience. Types of transitions. We could get bogged down here forever, so I am going to try and avoid that. I just didn't want to only talk conceptually about things. So what transitions are there? We're talking about all ages and all types of people. I started asking people as I got ready for this talk. I would just ask people casually, hey, what kind of transitions are there? I think the best response I got was one person said, oh, well, there's all the biopsychosocial transitions, which made me laugh because it sums up an incredible number of different types of transitions that people can go through. And if we want to break that down a little bit, again, thinking about micro or the smaller level transitions and the big ones, biological, a micro transition could be your physiological responses, an increase or a drop in blood sugar or something and how that impacts you. A macro or a large scale biological transition would be your developmental stages, things like how in infancy from 0 to 3, we grow neurons at a more rapid rate than any time in our life. That's a transition we're going through, again, out of our control. It's just something that happens. Or puberty, for instance, is a biological transition that's coming one way or the other. Psychologically, a micro transition might be like a mood change. A lot of, and especially like a threat response, the fight, flight, freeze response to something, that's kind of a very quick psychological transition. And then again, for macro or large scale, we've got our developmental stages, things like perspective taking and self-identity and self-awareness, transitioning into those ideas, more existential thinking. Socially, an example of like a micro or a small transition might be what they call like audience transitions. When a person leaves the room or a person joins a group, it can change the dynamic of the group. Sometimes we act differently. They've showed this in studies. If you pull one person out and send another person in, especially like an in-law or something like that, people behave differently. So those are little transitions. And I'm sure we can think of times where we or the people we love and support have been thrown off by just the movement of the people in the space. On a larger level, we talk about social transitions. We talk about, in early development, when we're very young, all we need is this is an example, but all we need is the love and support of our parents when we're very young. And as we get older, it becomes important as social animals to enculturate into your broader tribe, right? So it's painful for parents, but as kids grow up, they tend to spend less time eventually with their parents and more time with friends or doing other things. That's a transition. And then another really important one that I think we're all aware of, but we don't like to talk about a lot is very, very important people in our life come and go. That can be very, very impactful on us. So thinking about especially loss, big social transition. Other ways you could break this down, because that's not the only way you can break down types of transitions. I mean, we could do this for days, but you could look at it in age if you want to think of things. I sometimes think of it in the terms of infancy, childhood, preteen, teen, young adult, middle adult, older adult, or golden years. You could look at the transitions related based by kind of age and time. You could look at environments. You could say, what are the transitions at school, at home, in the community, other places you spend time. There's a lot of different ways we can come up with different transitions, but just to get everybody thinking about the transitions they may be experiencing or their loved one that they support might be interacting with. Now we'll move into maps, still defining our terms. This time I went with Merriam-Webster. I Googled it and I got an Oxford definition that I didn't like. So I moved on to Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster definition is a diagram or other visual representation that shows the relative position of the parts of something. It's a diagram or a visual representation. There's a strict versus literal definition, or a general definition, excuse me. And that's one reason I didn't use the Oxford definition, is because that definition was specific to geographical maps and cartology. It was a very specific, like these specific maps. We're talking in a more general sense, and we hear this word mapping used in lots of different ways. People use it very liberally. So we're using that more general definition of mapping, more like planning, using any form of diagram or visual representation to kind of enhance our understanding. So in that sense, we're talking about tools, largely executive function tools. It's really hard to hold all the information of all the moving pieces in your head and then think about that or manipulate it in your head. But can we put it down somewhere in a way that makes it easy to understand so we can free up our brain power to then have creative ideas or work beyond what's already on the document? And it was on this slide that I included my quote from that study that despite looking at a number of different mapping strategies that are used with people, they came to a conclusion. In summary, we conclude that mapping remains a challenge and an important field for future research and debate. I think that's important to point out because when we talk about geographical maps, which I think most of us kind of inherently think of, a road map or the map of the US or the world that we've been exposed to a number of times, it's important to note that we've had hundreds of years to dial in those maps. Hundreds of years. We've had incredible scientists and astronomers and people over history, great minds, trying to figure out all of the details and the ways that those kind of physical geographic maps work. We don't have that running start when we talk about people mapping, person-centered and family-centered mapping. It's not brand new, but it's not hundreds of years old either. So I think there's a lot to still figure out, and that article backs it up. It remains a challenge. We haven't dialed it in completely, but it's important for future research and debate. I'm just going to point out we don't have all the answers. And that's where it's important that we all have this basic understanding, because maybe with our powers combined, we can move things forward. How do we use maps? All right, so that's what maps are, but what do they do? Early on, maps were commonly used to identify, where am I? You leave home, where am I? We didn't know. And, you can see to the end of the horizon. We're talking about before advanced civilization, or the beginnings of advanced civilization. A big part of it is, where am I? And think of the kiosk at the shopping center and the hospital or the mall with the map, and it says you are here. One reason is to figure out where we are. Another reason is to develop perspective. Both our individual perspective of how things relate to each other, also shared perspective, because two people might look at something, as we said, and see something different. But if we can put it together into a tool, we can say, oh, I was looking at it this way, you were looking at it that way, I thought it was over here, you were. But now we've kind of put our perspectives together into a document that has more knowledge. It's kind of cumulative knowledge. Knowledge and understanding. We get things from maps, we look at it, they contain a lot of information, and how that information, again, it's a diagram or a visual representation of how things relate. So we're getting information from it. Curiosity and exploration. Sometimes we just pull open Google Maps, right? And we just like flip around and we're curious and we want to explore. And I think we could have that analogy with what we do with people mapping too. Sometimes we just want to be curious and say, what's out there? What if this happened? Let's explore this activity or that resource. Navigation, that's a gimme. That's where the regular geographic maps really kind of got their start, was how we get from one place to another. But that's really important too for people. How do I get from where I am now to where I want to be? And I hear that a lot in post-secondary transition planning is, I don't know exactly where I want to go because I don't know what the options are. That's tricky. Decision-making, maps can help us by giving us more information to make certain decisions. We draw comparisons and relationships. We make plans using maps. Even a traditional road map, you're going to say, well, if I have to make 3 stops, I'm going to make them in this order because it makes the most sense. It would be nice if we could do that with some of our people mapping, say that we've got these multiple goals. What scaffolding makes sense? Can they feed into each other? Can we build something cumulative to make it more efficient than, say, just working on goals in different directions all at the same time? And finally, I consider maps an access tool. Going back to the idea of executive function, maybe some people can hold these complex maps and ideas in their head and manipulate the information, but most of us cannot. So it's a matter of accessing this shared information and this perspective so we can then build out our understanding and perspective beyond that complex information that we have then represented. Key features of maps. This was fun for me because I hadn't actually done this exercise in terms of mapping with people, despite doing lots of transition planning and a lot of these elements. But digging into what are the key features of a quality map, especially in the sense of starting with a geographical map. So when I dug into what, our traditional maps, what they really need, it's these items on the left. If they miss some of those, it just becomes very unclear, or the maps become difficult to use. Doesn't mean they don't exist, but they become less valuable because they're missing information, or there's a lot of ambiguity. On the right, I started brainstorming how does this correlate to people mapping, person-centered mapping, family-centered mapping. So every map should have a date and a title. That seems really straightforward, but you'd be surprised, actually, most maps aren't really titled. Like a world map is a map of the world, but there's different types of world maps. And we often don't have the Robinson projection, or, we often get that. I think some maps could be titled more appropriately. We'll also see this with some of our documents. Something like an IEP, which I think we could argue is a type of map. It's a representation. It's a lot of words. Might not be the most appropriate representation for everybody. It does work for some people. Those are always titled and dated. It's required. We often see it's Guinevere's IEP. That makes it very straightforward. But sometimes we do these other planning tools and we forget to write a date on it, and we dig it out of the file 2 years later, and we're trying to figure out when this was, and it all becomes very unclear. So just being aware of the components that you want to include while you're kind of engaging in these activities. Symbols, all maps have symbols. This is a road, this is a mountain, whatever it may be. For our purposes, our symbols are often initials, they're acronyms, they're jargons. I would even argue that professional roles become symbols. Oh, that's the occupational therapist, it's the OT. But do we really understand what the OT does kind of philosophically, or do we just know what this OT does and is offering? So doing a better job of unpacking those kind of symbols and words so we can understand our maps better. Legend and key, again, without that, the symbols don't make any sense. So are we making a point to have some way of clarifying what the initials, acronyms, jargon, roles are? We need to be defining our symbols somewhere in our document or our map, so it's clear to everybody. That shared perspective can't be had if we're using different language and we don't understand each other, we'll be talking past each other. That's not shared perspective. Orientation and direction. Normally on your geographical map, this is your compass. But for us with people, where are you going? What is your direction? I highly encourage you to lay those values up there, just like I did today, as like the ultimate guiding compass. Now, your value, that's a challenge in and of itself, and that's a different conversation. But more often than not, when we can align our behavior with our values, we feel better. Even if something doesn't go well, we sleep better at night saying it didn't go well, but I acted in the way that I felt was true to me. It's a lot easier than when you don't act in a way true to yourself and it doesn't go well, and then you're really stuck kind of beating yourself up. So really try to figure out those values, play with those values, talk to the person about their values, and use those as your like long-term guide. We also have goals. That's your orientation and direction. We are trying to reach this goal. I think motivation gives us direction. Somebody's not motivated to work on a goal. How much progress are we going to make? Do we need to take a little time generating that motivation first? So it's going to have an impact. And finally, progress tracking. I noted that on here because to me, that's almost like the grid lines on like a world map. You know, how do we know if we're getting from where we are to where we want to go if we don't have some sort of process to know that we're in the right direction, the wrong, or just moving parallel to whatever we're trying to reach? A scale on a map, I think everybody's pretty much, this long equals a mile, whatever it might be. For our purposes in person planning, I see the scale as almost always time. In 1 year, we are aiming for this. In 5 years, we are aiming for that. It's usually a time-bound scale, and we want it linked to the current and future goals. Borders. Every map has borders. It's not a map of everything. It's a map up to a certain extent. So what are the borders we might deal with? It might be content. If you're getting a discipline specific, a communication evaluation or a physical therapy evaluation, there's going to be borders on that. It's going to be useful interdisciplinarily, but it's also focused specific area of content. So you don't necessarily want to go to that document looking for answers about something else. You need to understand where those borders are. Likewise, time creates borders. This was an old mapping process. This was an old document. Participants can create borders. Who actually contributed? Maybe we didn't get everybody's voice, and therefore we have put borders on our plan just from limited information. Also thinking about participants and dynamics, some teams can have people that are louder than others or more comfortable speaking than others. And if the communication flow gets out of balance, you can see the borders affected by that. And our environment is borders. Is this an IEP is a document for school and education. It's not really meant to inform a lot of the things at home, although you may be able to translate those there, but the borders are around a certain environment and a certain context. Moving on, purpose. We don't hear this a lot with actual maps, but they do have a purpose. That big oval world map that a lot of us have seen, its purpose is navigation. Things are actually as far apart as they are in the real world, but Greenland isn't actually almost the size of Africa. You have to optimize for certain things and you're going to give up for other things. So having a clear purpose, this purpose is to transition to the next grade. This purpose is to transition to adulthood. This purpose is to transition from one room to the next, but making sure that you have an intended purpose. And finally, distortion and limitations is a key part of every map. Like I said, Greenland isn't actually almost as big as Africa, but on that map, their focus is not surface area, it's navigation. But if you use that map to determine surface area, you're going to get misinformation. So just know that every map has distortion, every map has limitations. No matter how hard we try to develop a comprehensive tool, we need to be aware that there's some distortion and limitations in there. What does that look like in our person-centered plans? It comes in the form of bias. All bring biases. There's all biases around what people think others are capable of, what their abilities are, the participation. Some team members louder than others. That might distort, more focus in one area than the other. The unknown. The reality is we're not going to have all the answers for our people maps all the time. There's areas that we're going to have to fill in and dig into, and that's going to create distortions and certainly limitations. Like I said earlier, something we hear a lot in post-secondary transition is I just don't know what my options are. Well, that makes it really hard to draw out your map when you get to that point and it's just the mystical woods or whatever you might want to call it. Metric optimizing, again, that goes back to purpose. So if we know what the purpose of the map is, we want to make sure we're using it in line with that purpose and not taking information that might be distorted. And I'll remind people here, something that I think is important is we have some maps already. Like I said, IEPs, if you're in adult services, ISAs, if you're transitioning, you have an IEP transition plan, you have an access plan. If you get alternative credits, that explains it's a map of how you're meeting all of the graduation requirements required in your district, maybe through some alternate activities. So we have some of these maps. We may not be looking at them that way, and they may tell us what we want to know. We might realize there's more information we know. We might realize that maybe some of those documents don't have all of these key pieces, these key features, or we may decide that the presentation of the information doesn't work for everybody. Like I said, a lot of our kind of existing maps tend to be documents with lots of words. There are some really creative people out there that will draw more visual diagrams. So just thinking about how that information is presented. There we go. Types of maps. A diagram or a visual representation, just as a reminder, that shows the relative position and parts of something. We have visual spatial maps, geography, weather, climate, those sorts of things. We have social and relational maps, things like eco maps or flow charts that talk about your connections to people or services, how information flows up and down within a group. We have informational maps, all kinds of things, cognitive maps, brain maps, contingency maps, economic maps. In web design, there's relationship diagrams that tell you how the software talks to itself or the components. We have time maps. Believe it or not, your calendar is a map of time. It's a visual representation of how things are going to go over time. We have daily and weekly schedules, and I would even say that maybe some sequence-oriented things like a task analysis would fall into like the category of a time map. Ultimately, the goal is to develop a comprehensive map. These are all going to tell us something, but they're not telling us who a whole person is. So over time, the goal is to develop something that encapsulates all of this into a comprehensive map. Something that everybody can use, a tool that we can all have as a reference with a common direction, a common language, shared perspective, integrated activities. That's really the goal, but we may need to break it in pieces to get there.
Jayson, I just want to let you know we have about 15 minutes left.
Thank you. So that brings us right to two examples. Let's throw our examples here of in a concrete sense, what are some tools that we could use to help us draw out some of this information? One is aptly named MAPS. That's an acronym. It's got two kind of meanings. One is the McGill Action Planning System. It's also known as Making Action Plans for Students. This is a student and family-centered planning tool. It's designed for all people of all ages. It was really focused and created around student needs, but I have talked to people that have used it with adults, used it in different contexts, and it seems to have utility across the board. It's research-backed. Generally, the process is that this involves multiple people in an individual's life, usually at least the individual, the family, support providers, and anybody else with knowledge. That can be people from the community, employers, friends. And it's intended generally as a group meeting format, although you can get creative with how you implement it. But generally, there's 5 discrete sections. You do them one at a time. And this part is optional, but I love it when teams do it. Everybody contributes in the same order to each section, starting with the individual and then moving out to those that know them best slowly. So for most people, this looks like a process of first the person, then immediate family, then extended family, then friends, then providers, then community members and acquaintances. So you gather information that way just to make sure certain voices are heard and not blocked out and also rise to the top. All right, what are these 5 sections though? And I'll add that although it's developed as kind of a team meeting and in a group planning tool, I think there's value even in just sitting down with these and jotting down your thoughts individually. I think these are things that are valuable to think about. One thing that you want to know about MAPS is it doesn't necessarily ask you to set a scale or a purpose, but I just talked about the values of those. So I see colleagues and I think it's really brilliant. Sometimes they'll sit down to do a maps with a team and they say, this is for 1 year. This is for the grade to grade transition, or this is over 5 years. This is for the high school to adulthood transition. Or as an adult, this is for 3 years for moving out of the home and moving into a new home transition. So maybe give yourself both that time scale to work with and that purpose. Like, what are you really targeting here? You don't have to do that. You'll get a lot of great information, but if you do that, you're more likely to get targeted information in the area you're looking for. First section is history, relevant family, health, social, educational background. Who is how did we get here? Where am I? Right? That math question, where am I? Well, part of where I came from and what got me here. The next section is who is the person? What are the person's interests? Strengths, likes, dislikes. How would you describe the person? This really gets at our individual differences. It gets on how we might work around all of those features that are affected by individual differences for the person. Are they certainty oriented, uncertain? Are they open to experience? Are they an anxious person? Is this a controlled situation? Is it a voluntary situation? You can look at all of those variables here. I will also note that about maps in general, this isn't a tool that you're going to do and it's going to spit out a nice little map for you at the end. It's really an information gathering tool. It's an incredible and an idea generation tool. It's a great tool, but you will have to come back to it and synthesize that information, a person or a team afterwards. It's not going to give you a nice little printout afterwards and say, we coded it and this is what you need to do. Third section is hopes and dreams. What are the dreams, hopes, and goals of the person? We talked about that. The values, the goals. This is your orientation. Where are we going? Next, we talk about fears. What are your concerns and fears for the person? Things we want to avoid. For a lot of us, it's sometimes easier to talk about the fears and the hopes and the dreams. We don't know what's available. We're scared to articulate our hopes and dreams because we don't know if it's possible. But we can talk about our fears. And the value of this section is we can take those things and pivot them whoosh into hopes and dreams. You have a fear. I'm afraid that my child's going to be isolated when they graduate high school. Very, very legitimate. Very legitimate. And that can also be a hope and dream that after high school, I hope my child has an appropriate, vibrant social life. Negativity bias is real. We all see the worst in things. It's argued that evolutionarily it helps us to spot threats. So it may be easier to name fears. That's fine. The goal is to get the information. And the last section is needs. What is needed in order to achieve the dreams and goals? So this is where you start kind of putting together the pieces. This is where you've got your end point in your map and you've got where you are now and where you start kind of scaffolding. Or if we looked at the change phases, this is your preparation phase and it leads into your implementation phase. Next, charting the life course. I'm not going to go through this. I'm running out of time. I knew that would happen. Also, they have a lot of material. This is I highly recommend both maps and life course. Life course is an entire framework and suite of tools. It is designed for all ages and all kind of parts of life. And they have an incredible website, which I left here on the slide. You can really go right to the source and get a lot of information, including a number of their tools. They also have a YouTube channel. So again, instead of me walking you through this really comprehensive system that they have, this is very good. You could go to the YouTube channel. They actually have a 1-hour Foundations of Life course webinar. So that exists already. We don't need to do it again. Hear it from the source. I think an interesting thing also to note about the life course, charting the life course, is that my understanding of it is it was developed in partnership between the University of Missouri, Kansas City's UCED, University Center Excellence for Developmental Disabilities, which is the parallel organization to the CDCI at UVM. So within the kind of umbrella organization that I exist in, and it was made in collaboration with Missouri's Family to Family organization. So I almost see this as an interesting, here I am from one group with Vermont Family Network, and my understanding is this was created from your University Center on Disability in collaboration with your Family to Family or VFN equivalent in Missouri. So I recommend this tool. I definitely recommend checking it out. I think it's really great and it's very extensive. Again, research backed, and a lot of research coming out now, a lot of things being published now on this framework in particular. We are wrapping up. Before we leave, I just want to review the values again. If nothing else shines through, everyone has the capacity to thrive. Everyone deserves the opportunity to thrive. Individual differences are real. A good life can be had by anyone. Environment is important. Awareness and understanding. And I added one, transitions are everywhere and maps can help us manage them more successfully. Thank you. Thank you. Open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Jayson. We did have a few that had come in previously through the registration. Could you address how to get Section 8 vouchers, independent housing options, Think College options suited for individuals with autism?
Yeah, I will touch on those. Those could probably be presentations in and of themselves. Those are great topics. All right, I'll start with Section 8. I haven't dealt directly with Section 8 for several years, and things may have changed over COVID. So I would encourage you to, contact your local sources. But when I last knew, it was about getting in touch with your housing authority, your local housing authority, in generally preparing yourself for something like a 2-year wait list. Better than not to get on the list, even if you're not sure that you'll be ready at the time, because if you have to wait 2 years, when that 2 years comes, you can always say, we're not ready, and you'll go back to the bottom of the list. But it takes so long to work your way up the list that it can be beneficial if independent living or Section 8 living is an interest, just to get yourself in the system. Independent housing options. This is a huge topic because, again, individual differences. People have all different levels of support needs. What I will say is the state of Vermont is working on some pilots to expand housing options for people with developmental disabilities. Post-Brandon, we made a decision as a state to not have group homes. We were worried that we would take a lot of staff, say, from our institution, and we would make a bunch of mini institutions. We're 30 years removed from that now. We're not as worried about accidentally invoking the same paradigm that existed prior. So now the state has approved some piloting of group homes for young adults to live together with peer age individuals. But those pilots are just starting. They're just being put together. They're not broadly available to people. There's also a parent-based housing advocacy group that you might want to get involved with. It has done a lot of research in that area. Think College also falls within the CDCI umbrella. Fantastic program, integrated program, college education, but social experience, run by Brian Daig, incredibly knowledgeable individual. They've done a lot of really great stuff at Think College. I've seen some publications that actually drew on their data. You can check out the website. I've had individuals I worked with, whether it was developmental services or education, that participated in Think College, and Brian always proved himself to be very available for people that were interested. So I would try to reach out directly to get more information. One thing to know about Think College is it can be a college experience after high school. You can also, there's a lot of complexities here, but you could engage as part of dual enrollment. If you're thinking about college, but you want to use some of your high school supports, every student in the state of Vermont is entitled to college classes through dual enrollment. So you could consider exploring a program like that before you leave high school with some of your high school supports as a transitional step, but there's a lot of planning in there. And jobs for individuals with ASD. I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer for that because, this, as the saying goes, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I really, really believe in individual differences. And I just don't think I can say all people with autism fit into one situation or another because people just vary so drastically individually. I really think it's more valuable to go through some of the things we talked about, engage with some of those tools, talk to some workforce development people to figure out the job that's suited for you. Even if an autism is part of you, that's part of how you identify and part of your features, then build that into your personal kind of practice. But I don't feel comfortable saying all people with autism could do this or that because I just don't think the world works that way.
Thank you. If you all have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand if you want to ask Jayson something directly. We did have one more that came in. Jayson, can you speak to transition services available for homeschooled students in Vermont who need support preparing for college or employment?
It's a really good one. I'm going to assume in this case that transition services is relating to that post-secondary, that high school to adulthood transition, opposed to like any transition. I may be wrong, but with that assumption, there are available services. What those look like will depend a little bit on eligibility in the individual. But even if you're a homeschooled individual, if you meet eligibility criteria, you can engage with higher ability, formerly known as voc rehab. So if you, in theory, would have been eligible for an IEP or 504, regardless of whether you have one at home, that would make you eligible for higher ability services, and they are accessible to anybody doing this work. And they're tied in, and they actually, higher ability maintains networks of transition professionals. So I would encourage you to start there if eligible. Depending on the age, there's developmental services. You can get developmental services through the Bridge program at ages 3 to 22. It's not a service provider model where they give you staff, but it's having a contact at your designated agency to help kind of provide more clarity about what's available in developmental services. So if that eligibility is appropriate, you could engage with that organization. And if you're not eligible for some of those, there's always the Department of Labor. We have the Department of Labor is there to help everybody with growing up and seeking jobs and using tools. So those would be a few places to explore.
Great. We have just a few minutes left. Are there any other questions? We're getting quite a few thank yous in the chat, Jayson. Well, not seeing any. I'll take the opportunity to say thank you again, Jayson, for all of this great information. It was wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to put all of this together. You will see a link for an evaluation in the chat. If you could please take a few minutes to complete it so we can make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements, we would really appreciate it. And we do have more interesting workshops coming up, and you can find details about those on our homepage of our website, vermontfamilynetwork.org, along with the links to the previously recorded ones. We have tons of information on our website, and getting connected with us is easy. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you are a parent. We have 2 closed groups, one for all parents of children with disabilities, special health needs, and one for those with adult children. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news or check out our YouTube channel. We're here to help. Please contact us by phone or email. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.